Hello and namaste. This is the Almost Daily Zencast. I'm your host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Thank you for joining me today. The cosmos is calling. The cosmos is calling you, me, each and every one of us. There is a call to action going out now, has been for a time. I may have talked about it before, felt like talking about it today. Totally free of any scripted notes or anything like that. I just want to talk about the call to action. There's a spiritual call to action. At the center of this thesis that I have spent a huge chunk of my free time looking into, and that many others have spent their professional lives or their amateur hours looking into. At the center of this thesis is the notion that all of this phenomena that we call the physical reality of the universe, it's here by design, and it's not here, it wasn't assembled by a divinity exterior to itself, but rather it is sustained and projected or made manifest by that which you might call its creator. But creator implies externality, the creator is other than that which is created. Language, tragically, just does not suffice. So how do people who claim to have some insight into this, whether contemporaries out there now or in the past, pick an era, and there were spiritualist speakers, spiritualist philosophers, or ideologues, I guess you could call them, arguably, speaking out against other ideologies of often pertaining to the way in which reality functions. To the best of my understanding, from many sources, ranging from the esoteric to the quantum mechanical, research of physics, my understanding of what's going on is as follows. The material place, that stuff, or that collection of stuff, or that assemblage of localities that we call reality, is bound and sustained by, or within, shall we say, a finite yet infinitely unfolding fractal organism. It is an entity with consciousness. That consciousness is a singularity, that singularity is manifesting everything within the boundaries which we call reality. And it is also simultaneously experiencing the phenomena of being that which it is manifesting. And it is also simultaneously, in a perfect trifecta, perceiving all that which is happening within the realm of what we call manifest reality. So that divine unity of consciousness, that singularity, is simultaneously the creator making the art which is being created, and the audience which is observing the creator create the art. All of those entities, which we normally think of as separate, are in fact simultaneously and at once being made to happen by a singularity, by a unity of oneness. To the best of my understanding, within the confines of this finite yet infinitely unfolding fractal environment, which is not a place but a sentient system, within the boundaries of that, there are many iterations of expression and many levels of that vary, many levels of the reality in which the way in which reality operates is different. All of that being said, the sensation, the impression, the understanding, the political or philosophical or spiritual statement or norm that we, you and I, are individuals and separate from that divinity, that is inherently false. That should seem patently self-evident to anyone who understands what I mean by, divinity being simultaneously the manifester and the phenomena itself and the experiencer of the phenomena. Many people who have a flawed understanding of one of their given religions but cling to it might want to reject the statements that I'm making because they would seem to violate the teachings of their faith. But in truth, it's the other way around. The dogmatic and probably corruptly introduced descriptions of the relationship between the divine and reality which it has created are false. And it's as deep linguistically as the fact that in, for example, the Christian tradition, God created, past tense, the reality that we call the world or the universe or whatever. That means that it was an event that is over, and now things are just unwinding or working out, which implies a mechanistic view. It suggests a mechanistic view of the universe, which then discourages a transcendental or mystic or organic consciousness view of the universe. And that kind of talk is nonsense. God is busy creating, present tense, reality right now. God tells us these things are so in the religious texts, and tragically, we humans spent a lot of the intervening time between when the religious texts were created and now, and what we've been left with, lots of editing and corruption and infighting about which theory or interpretation should be taught or preserved has gone on and mutilated the text. There's a lot of things. Some of my favorite examples, I know I probably shouldn't repeat this one, but some of my favorite examples, I've talked about them before, but Christ himself will say things that indicate a transcendental framework or state of mind. Like, if thy eye be singular, thy body be light. Or the whole interesting, gather stones, cast away stones thing. There's literal and figurative interpretations of that, neither of which point to an esoteric or mystical place. But if you allow for the mystic or esoteric interpretation to be speculated on, stones can be seeds, which can be teachings of mystic wisdom practices, and that there are times to what do you do when you gather something? You usually put it away, right? You put it in a container. What do you do when you cast things? When you cast them away, if they're seeds, you're planting them. So, and there, actually, you can kind of flip the analogous interpretation of this the other way around. You can say that there are times if the stones are teachings or collections of ancient wisdom, there might be a time to scatter them across the world and hide them. Which is another way of saying plant them. Instead of planting them in, you go and plant them in some people who will preserve them kind of hidden away so that they may survive through times of oppression or times of punishment, being punished for having esoteric or mystical understanding of things. And then the time to gather them back up is the time to reveal them again. Because the inverse way of saying what do you do when you gather something is when you farm and gather something, you do put it away and you jar it up and then it goes shipped out, right? But conversely, another way of looking at it, when you gather something, it is so that therefore it can be distributed. That's the tricky bit, is that it's they're dynamic opposites, they're polemics, these two things that are being used. It works in either direction, and I digress, right? The universe is sending out a call to action because it's not because of any particular reason. To think that humanity is special enough that the entirety of the cosmos is deeply concerned with its own little evolutionary process is both true and not true at the same time. I don't think that the divine entity or being or singularity does or can engage with this physical reality in a sort of pick sides, have an opinion kind of way, because it is so busy being everything. Simultaneously, it is busy being audience, perceiver to it all. Therefore, and this is the fun part about this particular thesis, it's ideology free, and it's all about phenomena and experience, and it does, once you kind of work through it, it does intellectually shift the responsibility of being godly, or of God, in the traditional religious spiritual sense, God has been used as something to be afraid of, as thought control, behavior control. He will reward you or punish you accordingly. Therefore, you must behave according to these human, dictates created by human beings who act as intercession. The burden of being the divine and the worker of healing miracles gets shifted away from ourselves and is left up to some unprovable, invisible place. And then we, as individuals, are left dependent on the middlemen. But what if in this universe we explored what would happen if we turned all that upside down and shifted the burden of divinity onto the individual? All individuals. Obviously, the argument from the other side, from the middlemen, who want to keep God way over there in some intangible place that you cannot relate to, other than to fear it or to obey it. They don't want to get displaced. Those guys, they don't want to lose their jobs, and they don't want. There's probably a deeper issue going on. I think that those who have control over organized religions and political structures and cultural structures, they don't want humanity at the individual and collective level to open up its potentiality for its greatest good and discover what would be possible if it did, if it took on, if we as a species took on responsibility and ownership of being a member, an aspect, an undivisible, unremovable function of divinity being itself and observing that reality which it is manifesting. What would change about politics and about economy and about society and about the problems if we all did that in an earnest way, not in a, it can never be forced. I've said that before a bunch of times too. You can't force it. You can't split open the seed. You'll kill the entire plant that is yet to be if you split that seed open. At that point, the only thing it's good for is eating and ingesting and burning off its calories, which is valid. But if there is a divine purpose to rendering a reality matrix that looks and smells and stinks and behaves as this does, as we do, as it is happening now, it's difficult, right? It can be very overwhelming to go, why would, if that is so, if this is all being made manifest by the thing that we call God, which is simultaneously all of it and the observer of the movie of all of it, why would you do it? Why would it be doing so? I don't know. But maybe it's as simple as why we go to the movies and watch movies where people kill each other and save each other from being killed. I think a great moment in pop culture social commentary can be found in The Adventures of Rick and Morty, where Morty, in an attempt to rescue this one being that he has at first sort of like a aw, he just has an awe reaction. It's kind of cute and adorable. It's a gaseous cloud of nothingness and it has pretty colors and it sings a beautiful song. In an attempt to save its life and rescue it and return it to its home dimension, Rick and Morty and this, the being that is temporarily called Fart, are forced to render the end of many other people's lives because they're, in effect, liberating a prisoner that no one wants liberated. So lots of people go after them and chase them down, and there are, shots exchanged and buildings are collapsed and spaceships crash into things. And that is the conundrum that we find ourselves in, both in our media, our literature, our cinema, and in our real world. We live in a world where we send ourselves, our own brothers and sisters, our own children and nephews and uncles and aunts, and we celebrate the victories of, the bravery of, the courage of people that went off to participate in what by any other name would be called organized murder sport. So what is there to gain? I don't think the divine being that which is watching all this. What do you gain when you watch a movie about war? Cheap thrills. And maybe a little bit of patriotism, pride, superiority, feelings of superiority. We beat those bad guys up. What does God get out of it? What does God get out of watching a movie riddled with this much violence? Because that's what it's like. It's like we're all living semi-autonomous, talking, farting, eating, pooping movie cameras for God. And God is looking through all of our eyes and listening through all of our ears. And is simultaneously generating the dialogue that comes out of all of our mouths. What on earth could possibly be the point of that? Those of us who self-identify as mystics humbly suggest that it is as simple as transcendence. The question of, do we, as individuals and as a species, continue to turn a blind eye to that which we have forgotten but can easily remember, which is that we are it. It is us. And none of this is actually really real, because it set this up and created it. Maybe it's a giant supercomputer, but I kind of doubt it. I think more likely it is within the very mind of the divine entity that we call God. And that mind is probably incorporeal and needs not a physical case to exist in, nor a physical machine to be rendered by. Maybe what God needs is not anything that we can comprehend, but what God did is set up for us as dreaming the dream of illusionary separation as individuals. Maybe God set up for us the need to transcend ourselves here in this space. I highly doubt God's objective was to set up a realm where lots of people killed each other in his name and made much of money off the rest, while willfully neglecting any of the teachings and or messages that seem to have come from those who spoke with or communed with or, saw clearly that which is the divine being. I don't think that was the divine being's objective. Religion and oppression and profiteering and free market destruction of the natural world for the sake of the hoarding of imaginary capital, imaginary economic measuring sticks, because that's all really, if you think about it, currency is. Especially if the more you detach it from a tangible thing that exists in nature. Currency was once attached to gold, right? Or to other material substances that exist in nature. Do you think that's what God wanted? No. Doesn't matter what religion you were raised in, or if you refuse to accept religion as real. If you abandon the filters in your mind and invite the universe itself to show you the universe, it seems, based on the evidence and the testimony available for review throughout history, both contemporary and in the past, it seems as though, and I'm inclined to think that this is correct because I've had just enough phenomena, experience, to be inclined to think so. It seems as though the universe is fully capable of helping you remember, helping you experience, not understand in sentences, but directly experience the divine phenomena of singularity projecting out totality in order for singularity to take in the narrative experience of all the events of totality. And if that is so, then ultimately what's going on here on this planet in these countries where all these people are suffering and all this pain is being caused, it's just God doing it to God's self. And if we can wrap our brains around that enough to build consensus around it, maybe, just maybe, we can break all these terribly stupid habits that we have. And end this vicious cycle down the ego trap rabbit hole path of ego trap rabbit holes towards what we commonly call damnation. Damnation, in my opinion, is simply the never-endingness, the sort of spiritual pain that is incurred by being trapped by one's ego avatar, to just continue to go around and around and around this meat grinder merry-go-round without learning any of the lessons. It is suggested by some, and I've experienced things to feel this way myself as well, that there are a few levels before us. It isn't on and off, right? Like, I think I've addressed this before in previous episodes. It isn't like a one step and you win the grand prize sort of thing. Which is why when religions get hijacked, things get reduced down to the really simple sort of don't think about it too hard, just say yes kind of questions. Like, do you accept Jesus Lord as your personal Lord? Do you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior? If you say yes, then you are free and saved and redeemed. It's not that simple, folks. And then people run around patting themselves on the back, letting themselves get away with all kinds of bloody hell, fucking clusterfuckery of bullshit. Because it's okay. Jesus already died on the cross for my sins, right? So the lesson plan is subtle. And it has multiple layers and gets to places that, well, from this vantage point down here, don't make any sense. And any one of us can sort of gain some direct personal, undeniable, phenomenological experience that indicates the veracity of this sort of larger image of the universe. Because think about it. I mean, it says in the Bible, God says He is the Alpha and the Omega and everything in between. What does that mean? He's the beginning and the end of everything that exists. Now, obviously, fearmongers within the Christian traditions have rendered that is a rendered interpretation that basically says, well, He created it and He can uncreate you, as a fear tactic, and so therefore do what I tell you. I think God wants you to do, but it could also be seen as a little bit more direct expression of singularity, like the Big Bang, which is source, and it's neat, it's interesting and valid that there's congruence here between a religious or spiritual text and science, right? Science says, that as crazy as it sounds, if you follow the math backwards, everything was once in a little tiny impossible singularity. and that singularity brought forth from within itself everything that we now understand to be what we call physical reality. Well, if God is the alpha point and the omega point, then you have an infinite loop of projection and reception. Or in purely material terms, as far as astrophysics goes, the expansion and contraction. It sounds an awful lot like a heartbeat or breathing. If the universe... Now, here's the hard part. Before I move on to the if the universe is not alive statement I was going to make. If the universe is not a living, conscious, sentient being, then no amount of meditation or whatever, or any activity, really, will ever sort of cause you to experience something that would lead you to then afterwards see that the universe is a sentient living being. The only reason why people would repeatedly come to that conclusion throughout history and different cultures and different eras and through different practices is either they were all liars or there's something to it. And the only reason why this notion would be marginalized so often by so many oppressive regimes vis-a-vis the use of a completely different, a radically opposite definition of divinity and divine, defining it as not as a process by which this phenomena is happening, but rather as the owner of this object that we find ourselves in. It wouldn't be used that way or re-rationalized that way if they weren't trying to prevent us from communing with the organic definition of it. Why? That's a great question. This is where people get lost often. If the universe is a living sentient being, entity, and we are an inseparable part of it, like a leaf is alive and has its own structures that can be, discreetly identified, but it is inseparable from the rest of the tree. And if we are like a leaf, but under the false and very incorrect and probably therefore unhealthy and oppressive and damaging and traumatic belief of this false statement that we are alone, individuals, separate from God, then it benefits those who run society to prevent us from realizing that is untrue. That what they teach us is a lie. And here's the fun part. The theory goes, and God says so in the Bible too, which is funny. If you meditate, you can achieve a kind of stillness that opens the filters of perception so that you can then directly, personally, in an undeniable way, perceive that God is that which is all things. And that's it. And God says something pretty spot on right there in the Bible. I can't remember the exact passage, but I'm sure my Bible-thumping friends out there will gladly give you the chapter and verse. But God says, be silent and know that I am God. Or something like that. Or that I am with you. Be silent and know. I'm going to look that up. Why didn't I look that up for this episode? Maybe I shall look it up at another time and make it a part of a whole other episode. But I've gone around in that circle before. Let me assure you that everything I've said in this segment, I think is true. I believe is true. And while I may or may not be doing a good job of presenting to you the evidence for how you may also investigate for yourself, it's whether or not it is true. I will assert that an honest, genuine, open-minded, and diligent effort at meditation with a willingness to investigate, to discover what practice or combination of practices works best for you and your mind and your body and your soul. A genuine and earnest application of those practices for 9 months will provide anyone with the kind of direct phenomenological experience that will make them want to investigate more, that will convince you that meditating more is better for you than meditating less, and that will encourage you to begin to reconsider any and all socially normative, sociopolitical, spiritual, religious beliefs you may have clinged to in the past. At least reinvestigate them in terms of looking for bits that no longer jive because they purposefully seem designed to prevent you or discourage you from investigating your own internal phenomena. People talk a lot about privacy in the political and social, circles of public discourse. And yet very little, and privacy is important and is constantly being violated. And there's a sort of level of privacy that it gets neglected to be, addressed, I think. And that's our spiritual privacy. In as much as that it is a violation of my human rights at an organic level, at a cosmic level, for others to dictate to me or to you or to anybody articles of faith and then request that those articles be blindly adhered to without thinking about it. That to me is a violation of my privacy. I get to mull over, render, think about, analyze in any which way I want any and all philosophical or spiritual, you know what I mean? Like, that to me is a privacy issue. That's why I'm sort of, creeped out by how readily parents, but then again, that's a perpetuating thing, right? If you were raised in a church, you're going to want to raise your kids in a church, especially if you never, ever, ever questioned the indoctrination. And conversely, it's a tricky issue because I want to, as a person who believes in the liberation of mankind's or humankind's, of the entire species from the mental slavery of ideology, I've got to balance that intention with my respect for every other individual's privacy. So to that end, I want to assure you guys as we come rounding around the last 6 minutes of this cast. I might cut it short so that I can set up for the next one, but I got plenty of time. That while the moral imperative might be to wake others up, we can only do it by facilitating their ability to question and investigate their reality and their assumptions about reality. And the best way to do that is by example, my friends, and by just communicating, sharing. Which is why I talk about meditation and why I try to raise the kinds of questions that I've pondered for many years so that you can ponder them, as opposed to just dictate to you things I think are true that you should agree with. I think I do a fair job of that, right? Friends, listeners, if you disagree, please, please, please shoot me a message. I want to make amends and to address those concerns. But if you agree, I appreciate your support, and I always welcome supportive commentary. But more importantly, add your questions to what do you want to talk about next. 4 minutes and it'll take forever to wait till 20. It's 30 seconds now. Almost 4 minutes and 20 seconds left in today's segment of what am I doing? I don't even remember. That's not true. That's a joke. I'm kidding. The Almost Daily Zencast. We have to unite. This call that's coming out, the cosmos is ringing out. It's for, and I say this because I see a lot of evidence of polemics and infighting and individualism within the spiritual communities out there, at least the ones I can observe through social media platforms. And I think it's time to, I think today, now we live in a time where it's time to gather the stones, so that the seeds, so that we may plant them. So, if that makes sense. And it is time for those of us with a spiritual identity or a spiritual mindset or a spiritual identity, that if we call ourselves spiritual people, if we are meditating, then we need to meditate more and with a greater enthusiasm, and find ways to encourage others. And I know everybody that does is, right? It's growing, it's happening. I'm not in any way, shape, or form ahead of the bell curve here. But I am bringing that idea to those who haven't quite seen the growth of that phenomena yet. It's not on your radar. I'm telling you, it's happening. People are taking up yoga like crazy. And the reason that's important, it's not just about convincing people to all be on one thing, on one jam, on one trend, but rather that if everyone is practicing a practice that works for them, the more people practice, the more people practice. If we can reach a tipping point of critical mass, of spiritual practicing on earth, genuine, earnest, loving, compassionate, healing, spiritual practicing, things like meditation, yoga, prayer, etc., 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 dancing, singing, then we can effect change and healing and growth at the species-wide level. And if there was ever a time, folks, that we need to get on that bandwagon, that time is now. I want to thank you again for listening and send you off with a thought of lots of prayer of love and compassion for you. Much gratitude for being here, for tuning in, for checking it out, and for sharing it if you're sharing it. If you've never been to my Instagram account, please check that out. There's lots of memes that can, run concurrent with the kinds of topics that I talk about on this podcast. That's Instagram at Mr. Zeppo, no period. And I think the link should be in my profile here on Sprecher and on YouTube. Keep breathing, my friends. Keep praying those prayers of love and gratitude and healing and forgiveness. And keep broadcasting that energy. The world needs it. Until next time, this has been the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. May peace, love, and grooviness be with you.